Buenos días, bienvenidos al Simposio de Estudios Irlandeses. Es una gran alegría ver a tantos amigos y colegas aquí reunidos. Y para comenzar voy a decir unas breves palabras. I'll switch to English because we have colleagues from different parts of the world, so I think it's going to be kind of our common language. So good morning and welcome to the Symposium of Irish Studies, organized jointly by ABEI, the Brazilian Association of Irish Studies, and AEIS, the Association of Irish Studies for the South of America. In the case of ABEI, this is the 17th Symposium of Irish Studies in South America and the third for AEIS. On this occasion, we gather at Universidad del Salvador in Buenos Aires to reflect on commemoration or celebration, the Irish Revival 1 century later. This event is sponsored by the Embassy of Ireland in Argentina and is endorsed by the W.B. Yeats Chair of Irish Study from the Facultad de Filosofía, Letras y Ciencias Humanas of Universidad de São Paulo, Brasil, the Cátedra Extracurricular de Estudios Irlandeses at USAL, Buenos Aires, endorsed by Rector of Resolution 366, la Cátedra Extraordinaria Ivan Boland and N. Wright de Estudios Irlandeses, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, Cátedra Libre Extracurricular de Estudios Irlandeses de la diáspora irlandesa Edna O'Brien, Colin McCann, Universidad Nacional de La Pampa, endorsed by Resolution 444, and Cátedra Libre de Pensamiento y Cultura Irlandesa from Universidad Nacional de La Plata, Argentina. To open this symposium, please welcome Mr. Gerard McCoy, Ambassador of Ireland to Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay, Mariana Bolfarine, President of ABEI, Justin Harman, President of AEIS, and Paula Ortiz as head of the host university, USAL. Welcome again.
For Foreign Affairs, Simon Cook,
ya descargué la app y tengo a Didi activo. Me voy para todos lados, y ahí espero el colectivo. Mucha seguridad, por fin puedo viajar tranquilo. De Saavedra hasta La Plata, al toque nos fuimos. Diciendo no, llegando.
And you are our key partners in this joint endeavor. Next March,
Continúa abierta la inscripción para solicitar los subsidios de gas y electricidad. Además, si ya lo hiciste pero necesitas corregir algún dato, ingresa en argentina.gov.ar/subsidios y completa el formulario. Segmentación energética, Argentina Presidencia.
To supporting and deepening institutional exchange between we and the European Union and the respective members of CELAC. In conclusion, may I again thank our the conference and Buenos Aires.
To open the activities of the first hybrid symposium following the COVID-19, which has been affecting because it still is our lives so severely. This year's symposium, commemoration or celebration, the Irish Revival, 1 century later, is especially important as it is being jointly organized by 3 leading centers for Irish studies in South America, ABEI, the Associación de Estudios Irlandeses del Sur, and our most generous host, the Cátedra Extracurricular de Estudios Irlandeses at USAL. This annual event is significant as it promotes connections with fellow associations, such as SILAS, Society for Latin American Studies, the Asociación Española de Estudios Irlandeses, AEIS, the International Association for the Study of Irish Literatures, USAL, the Cátedra de Estudos Irlandeses, WB8 from São Paulo, the Cátedra Extraordinária de Estudios Irlandeses, Evan Boland and Ann Wright from Mexico, and the Cátedra Libre Extracurricular de Estudios Irlandeses y de la Diáspora Irlandesa from La Pampa. The Brazilian Association of Irish Studies is responsible for the spreading of Irish studies in undergraduate and postgraduate levels, as well as beyond the university walls. ABEI also foments mobility programs such as the prestigious ABEI Haddad Fellowship and the exchange between visiting professors from Brazil and abroad. The outcome of these connections have been published in the ABEI Journal for more than 20 years. We believe that by supporting Irish studies, we promote discussions about our own distinct cultures in dialogue with it. Thus, Irish studies is an educational experience, a process of intercultural understanding and development. Thanks to the Irish Embassy and Consulate, since 2018, ABEI has been recipient of the Immigrant Support Program grant, which is also supporting this event, and which allows the association with financial autonomy, conferring it national and international visibility. My most heartfelt thanks to all those who have embarked with us in this journey from many places, working online with meetings, email exchanges. And I sincerely hope that you will all enjoy the next few days of rich academic debate, face-to-face and online. May we continue hoping and digging, as Seamus Heaney once wrote, for more days like this. Thank you.
Buenos días, un gran placer para mí dar la bienvenida a todos los amigos argentinos aquí y todos los visitantes. Thank you very much for being with us here today. This is an important event for our association, the Asociación de Estudios Irlandeses del Sur, founded in the University of La Pampa in 2017. This is our 3rd symposium bringing together Irish studies activists from various places, but we're particularly pleased to have been able to organize this event, bringing together representatives of, first of all, of ABEI, very important anchor of Irish studies in Latin America. Thank you to all of our keynote speakers. Delighted to have representatives from UNAM in Mexico, from obviously from USP in São Paulo and the other universities participating, and indeed from Spain. We're delighted that we have a representative from AEIS. And of course, not least, we are delighted that we have the president of SILAS, Margaret Breheny. Thank you, who traveled to join us also. Very important also to have the joining together of the three universities with chairs of Irish studies here in Argentina, here in USAL, obviously, but also the chair in the Universidad Nacional in La Pampa and in the Universidad Nacional in La Plata. It's a wonderful program where I'm very conscious that we have Donal Ryan waiting to speak to us from Ireland, so I'm not going to go on at any great length, just simply to say this builds in a sense on the very comprehensive program we organized on the occasion of the centenary of the 2016 of the Easter Rising. And this is something which I think should be seen as a continuation of that commemoration. We look forward to the event, and I will close now and hand over to Paula, and then I think we're going to listen to Donal Ryan. Thanks, Paula.
Well, welcome to Buenos Aires and to Universidad del Salvador. I won't say much. Everyone has said everything already. So I just wanted to tell you about our diploma in Irish Studies. So if you let me share the screen. Okay. Oh, I can see where is that? There's so many things in the screen I can see. Here, there you go. Well, our university has an extracurricular chair of Irish Studies, and so our diploma belongs to this chair. It's very short. This is our flyer, and this is the first academic program of its kind that we have in Argentina, and it's taught in Spanish language. So we also want to share and to extend the purpose of the extracurricular chair with this diploma. Let me tell you that the diploma has 4 modules. Ireland, past, present, and future, construction of the Irish identity, history of the Irish immigration, and the special seminar that changes every year. But the most important thing about this is, there, okay, the publication that we have, because this diploma, this year we have the 4th cohort of this diploma, not only transmits information, but also generates knowledge. So the final papers that each student present at the end of each cohort is a reflection of all they learn in the diploma, but also what they generate with their own study and in their own research. So there has been a variety of topics that we had in the three previous cohorts, and we hope that the 4th one also will generate good papers. And the first volume reproduces the final papers of the first cohort because it was a very large cohort. And today, for all of you who are here, you didn't know, but it's already online. The 2nd volume is already online, and so you can see it in one of those links that we have there. But the important thing is that you see that we have the second volume, and as an example, we have one of the papers there to reflect it. So that is what I wanted to share with you, and I hope that everyone can go and read all those papers that are really very interesting, and they have a very thoughtful information about what they have researched for the papers. So that is all. This is a picture of the first cohort. There were 30, and this is a picture of the second cohort, a little bit. This is the final class. Our teacher, Viviana Keegan, gets kind of crazy and wears a wig. And the third cohort also, as you can see, everyone is smiling, and it wasn't only for the picture. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy this symposium.
Okay. Perfect. Hi, Donal. How are you? That's great to see you.
Hi, how are you doing?
Can we start? Okay. Perfect. Well, is he seeing the audience? Yes? Okay. Thank you. All right. So good morning, everybody. It's really a great pleasure to see all of you here attending the first session of the Symposium of Irish Studies in South America. So it's a great honor to introduce you to the Irish writer Donal Ryan. In 2016, novelist and playwright Sebastian Barry described Ryan in the Guardian newspaper as, I quote, "the king of the new wave of Irish writers," unquote. All of his novels have been #1 bestsellers in Ireland, and his debut novel, The Spinning Heart, published in 2012, was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2013, and his fourth novel, called From a Low and Quiet Sea, here it is, was also longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2018. The Spinning Heart was voted Irish Book of the Decade in 2016 in a nationwide poll run by Dublin Book Festival. He holds the record at 4 for most nominations for the International Dublin Literary Award. Ryan has won numerous awards for his fiction, among them the European Union Prize for Literature, the Guardian First Book Award, and has been shortlisted for several more, including the Costa Book Award, again for his fourth novel, and the Impact Award. In September 2021, he became the first Irish writer to be awarded the Jean Monnet Prize for European Literature. His second novel, The Thing About December, which was published in 2013, was adapted into an Irish language film, Foscad, in 2020. It was also adapted for the stage by Decadent Theatre Company in 2019, those who are specialized in literature, in theater. It's interesting for you to know. And also The Spinning Heart was adapted by Articulate Anatomy Theatre Company in 2017 and staged at the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin. His other three novels are All We Shall Know, published in 2016, Strange Flowers in 2020, The Queen of Dirt Island in 2022, and he also has a short story collection called A Slanting of the Sun, published in 2015. He holds a degree in law from the University of Limerick and worked for the National Employment Rights Authority before the success of his first two novels allowed him to pursue writing as a full-time career. Ryan's books has been translated into over 20 languages, so it is a great privilege for us to have Ryan at the Symposium of Irish Studies in South America. Donal will speak about his work and will delight us reading some excerpts from your books. So welcome, Donal, to this symposium, to Argentina, even in a virtual form, but the floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be with you. I'm very happy to be speaking to you, and I wish I was there in person. But unfortunately, for various reasons, I'm currently unable to travel. You know, I was thinking I might start with just a very short extract from one of Seamus Heaney's long poems, Station Island, because it contains, this extract contains some of the best advice that a writer can be given. And if there are writers in the audience, and I'm sure people in the audience will be familiar with the text, but this is where Seamus Heaney imagined a conversation between himself and James Joyce, or the ghost of James Joyce. And when I read this poem first, I was quite young, and I presumed that Seamus Heaney was, well, I was younger, I wasn't that young. I presumed that Heaney was imagining a conversation between himself and an older version of himself. But I was wrong, apparently. But this is what happens in the poem. Then I knew him in the flesh, out there on the tarmac among the cars, wintered hard and sharp as a blackthorn bush. His voice, eddying with the vowels of all rivers, came back to me, though he did not speak yet, a voice like a prosecutor's or a singer's, cunning, narcotic, mimic, definite as a steel nib's downstroke, quick and clean. And suddenly he hit a litter basket with his stick, saying, "Your obligation is not discharged by any common right. What you must do must be done on your own. So get back in harness. The main thing is to write for the joy of it. Cultivate a work lust that imagines its haven like your hands at night, dreaming the sun in the sunspot of a breast. You are fasted now, lightheaded, dangerous. Take off from here and don't be so earnest. Let others wear the sackcloth and the ashes. Let go, let fly, forget. You've listened long enough. Now strike your note." I think there's something so wonderful and powerful about those words, because it is an exhortation to writers to unshackle themselves from any of the considerations that we allow to stymie our progress as writers. Worry being the main one, I think. I think it's very important to seek the joy in the task of writing, because I often hear people talk about the suffering they go through and how difficult they find it to write. But I think that if that's the case, there's no point. I think that life is very short and we have to seek joy in the things that occupy us. And so I think it's important for us to be free, as Heaney exhorts us in the poem, or as Heaney is exhorted by Joyce, and we are by proxy. But I haven't always taken that advice myself as a writer. I worried for so many years about the quality of my individual sentences that every single thing I wrote, I ended up burning or tearing up and destroying. And my late father used to come to my apartment in Limerick City. He would drive 30 miles from our home in Nina in Tipperary, and he would let himself into the apartment in order to gather up pieces of stories and chapters of novels that I might have left unburnt. And he kept all of these in a kind of archive in the attic for years, God bless him, because he knew that I was unable to apply myself properly to the task of being a writer, even though it was the only thing that I ever really wanted to do. And it can all go horribly wrong, of course. I wrote a novel over about 2 years that when I sent it to my publishers, they said it wasn't really publishable. And I couldn't see what the problem was, until my eyes were opened very gradually and very kindly and gently by my editor, Brian Langdon, who's also a very good friend, I'm glad to say. And he was very circumspect and politic in his advice that the novel I'd submitted wasn't going to be published in anything close to its current form. And so I couldn't face the thought, this is only about a year and a half ago, and I couldn't face the thought of dismantling this thing that I had thought was my opus, and changing it radically and putting it back together in a saleable, more commercial, more readable form. So I sat here where I'm sitting now in a kind of state of silent, abject panic, thinking, what am I going to do? And I heard a kind of whisper, and I know it wasn't a whisper from outside, but it felt very much as though it were. It felt very much as though I was being given a gift that I didn't deserve from the universe, or from perhaps some ancestor, perhaps my grandmother. But somebody whispered to my voice, what about a story about women living in a house together? It's very like the house you grew up in, that small house in the estate where you were reared, you were 9. It looks very like that. But there's no man there. There's a woman and her daughter-in-law and her daughter, and maybe a 4th generation might arrive on. And this story seemed to kind of arrive almost fully formed in my imagination. And I began to write. And over about 12 weeks, I wrote the first draft of this novel, The Queen of Dirt Island. And it came out okay. And it really felt as though somebody somewhere in the ether, or in the heavens, or in some dimension, took pity on me and said, we better help him out because he's in trouble. And I'm so glad they did. So I'm going to read, and actually the first draft of the novel was much longer than the finished book. It was a draft 0. My colleague at the University of Limerick, Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, talks about the very first iteration of any creative work as being a draft 0, not even draft 1, because draft 0 must come before even your first draft. It's where you set down in a very messy and haphazard and fragmentary way all of the elements of your story. And eventually, through redrafting, all of these things will come together, hopefully. And you'll be able to end up with a kind of crafted and readable draft of a novel. So in the draft 0, this novel went on and on into the future, into the 2060s, and the main character is in her dying day. So I might read that at the end, because this is that last chapter is included in a very limited edition of the book that was published by a bookshop called Kenny's of Galway. So they did their own version of the book, which had a foreword and just that extra chapter at the end. But in this chapter, from the novel, one of the main characters, Eileen Aylward, is proposed to by the brother of her late husband. So she was a very young widow. She was widowed shortly after the death of their first child. And a few years later, her late husband's brother comes down from his farm on the hills to make his proposal. It's a very short chapter. It's exactly 500 words. And it's called Proposal. Chris proposed to Mother. Oh, and I should say that the chapter is written in the 3rd person, but from the point of view of a young girl called Saoirse Aylward, through whose eyes most of the novel is prismed. Chris proposed to Mother on an evening in early summer with his working clothes on him, as though he'd been seized suddenly by some amorous impulse, some wild desire that had been lying dormant. He came rushing down from the fields to the village. Half-cocked, as Nana said later, though she didn't wholly disapprove of his hastily conceived and poorly executed plan. He stood a long while at the side door, mumbling. Saoirse had never seen a redder face. Mother had stepped back to let him in. She had a cigarette just lit, and she was pulling on it deeply. "Come in, Chris," she said, through a cloud of blue smoke. "I won't, Eileen. My boots are covered in muck. I won't drag it in along your clean floor." "Ara, clean my arse," said Mother, and Chris laughed, a high chuckle, the way he always did. Chris enjoyed Mother, and she liked him right back. From somewhere, from the ether or the blue heavens, or the fumes of new growth or agricultural diesel, he drew courage and he made his proposal. "Eileen, I was wondering," Saoirse heard him say. "Wondering what, Chris?" "Or I was wondering if it wouldn't be the best thing for all concerned if you and me, if I and you, if you and I, if me and you." And then he said it straight, nearly in a shout. "Will you marry me?" Saoirse saw Mother bend forward as though someone had struck her in the stomach. And she grabbed in her two fists the lapels of Chris's overalls and pulled him into the kitchen, slamming the door closed in the same movement. Chris's eyes were opened wide in shock. Whatever he'd been expecting, it wasn't to be manhandled off his feet. He straightened himself and put a hand over his face and drew it downwards, as if to reset himself, to regain something of his passive countenance. "What kind of rubbish are you talking, Chris?" But Chris didn't know, it seemed, what kind of rubbish he'd been talking. But on he ploughed. "We wouldn't have to, you know yourself, be married in the fullness of the word. We'd just, you know yourself, take the bad look off of things. You'd have, you know, a bit of company. Yourself and the baby." "Baby?" Saoirse was 11 years old, and she opened her mouth to protest this slight, but some vague wisdom rose from within her and silenced her. Paddy and Chris called her the baby, and maybe they always would. "I love you dearly, Chris," said Mother, "and I'd be a lucky, lucky woman if I were free to marry you. But I'm still, in my heart and soul, married to your brother, and I will be, I'd say, for all of eternity." Chris said it was okay. He was sorry. And Mother said she was sorry too, and she kissed his cheek. And Chris dragged himself back up the hillside, and he didn't come down again for a long, long time. So that's the sorry tale of poor Chris and his proposal to his sister-in-law. And Chris, I suppose, and nearly all of the characters in that novel are drawn very closely from characters in my own life. The titular queen of Dirt Island is a woman who is very strong and quite profane and very loving. And she's fiercely loyal to her family and her family-in-law. And she was kind of disgraced by her own family for falling pregnant out of wedlock. This would have been in the mid-70s or late 70s. So, you know, Ireland was still a fairly, pretty much a theocracy and pretty much under the thumb of the church. And we were kind of guided morally by our parish priests for the most part, in rural Ireland anyway. And so Eileen, being from a kind of traditional farming family who were very conservative, has fallen out with her parents, but this causes her great heartache. And not all of the elements of that character's life are drawn from reality, but the woman herself and the spirit of the woman is drawn directly from my own mother. When my mom read the novel as just a sheet of loose pages, as she always does, because she insists on being either the first or second, or at least one of the first readers of everything I write before it goes to my publishers, she finished and said, "God, I don't know about that one, Eileen. Where did you get her from?" And it was as though she didn't recognize anything at all of herself in the in the character. And it's strange when that happens. It's strange, the deficit that exists between how we see ourselves and how we're seen, what we project into the world and what people interpret of what we project. I'd like to read just a short poem called The Traveller by one of my favorite poets called Martina Evans. It's from this collection, The Windows of Graceland. Martina Evans is from Cork. And this is a poem about another strong woman, a traveller who in the poem comes to a village and causes all kinds of mayhem. And it was strange when I read this. I know many people from the traveling community in Ireland, and when I read this first, she was so familiar. Now, of course, you know, she was familiar as an individual, as herself, not as a representation of a community or anybody else. This is a very singular and very unique person, but she just felt so like somebody I knew myself. It was incredible. And I was thinking afterwards, maybe it was, maybe Martina Evans knew the same person, because, you know, this person would have had a fairly peripatetic lifestyle. She would have lived in various places. So I plan on asking Martina about it when next I meet her. The traveller. She came alone on foot, and straight away they noticed she was a rebel. Before punk, before rap, she had streaked hair, orange and black, and a loud transistor radio that blared through the village that hot day, drowning the sound of the insects in the grass. She didn't say ma'am to anyone. She said, I don't want your fucking old clothes or your old fucking soft apples. She said she wanted money, and she went to every house, repeating a request, kicking foxgloves, rejecting everything else that was offered, and no one produced money. Only everyone said that the world had gone mad, and it was only now they realized, weren't the old tinkers lovely and quiet compared to the cut of that big one with her transistor radio bawling under her arm like a terrible fuck you voice from the future. The last place she called was Mikey Dorgan's. He gave her a half dozen eggs out of the goodness of his heart, not realizing that she meant business. It was only when she'd left he found that she'd pelted the 6 of them, and they were running in yellow streams down the back of his gable wall. Isn't that wonderful? It's such a gorgeous portrait and such a gorgeous comment about society and about how we can just place our rose-tinted glasses on when it comes to the nature of the past and the nature of the people that populated our past. I was thinking, actually, it might be, if it's okay with you guys, you know, to open the floor, because if we don't, I could just ramble on forever. I tend to be quite verbose at times, especially when I'm nervous and addressing a crowd, especially a crowd of academics, because I always feel my imposter syndrome kicks in very intensely. So if anybody wants to ask a question or guide the talk in any way, please feel free. Okay, just by way of enticement to ask a question, my wife, Anne-Marie, gives out to me a lot because I am unable to obfuscate or to dress things up or to formulate anything resembling a lie. An awful lot of writers are terrible liars, and they won't tell the truth in Q&A sessions. But I told a terrible lie about 30 years ago, and I swore to God I'd never lie again. And so this has made me ridiculously honest about everything. And so every answer I give to a question is completely unvarnished. And for that reason, whenever I publish a book and do newspaper interviews, I'll always say something that is embarrassing for me or my family or my wife or my children. And this thing will invariably be used as the headline. It's my own fault. So I'll have a look through a book here for reading while you guys think of something you might want to ask me. Will I wait or will I go ahead? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Look, I'll read a kind of a very abridged version of a short story. So, and while I'm doing so, maybe you guys might have to think about what you might want to ask. Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. We'll wait.
So this is an abridged version of a story I wrote called Tommy and Moon, and it is strangely the only short story of mine that I'm really happy exists. I have no huge confidence in my abilities as a short story writer, and I should have, but I don't. It's something I find much more difficult than writing novels. But this story, Tommy and Moon, was written in kind of the same nature as my last novel. It felt as though it was being gifted from somewhere else. And I wrote it very quickly. And when it came time for the story to be edited, my editor had no changes at all, which is very unusual. So not even a comma or a word was changed. And I remember writing it as my wife was cooking dinner, and I was in the kitchen. And because it was flowing so well, I was afraid to up sticks and move, because I didn't want to break the flow that seemed to have risen from somewhere. And so I was completely in her way. And for the whole writing I wrote it in a few hours, that she kept giving out to me saying, you have to move, you have to go. I kept saying no. So all around me was the chaos of the cooking of a big meal for family, while I tried to hammer this story into existence. So the main character in the story is a writer who has found himself experiencing terrible writer's block. And he befriends an old man who lives in the house next to the house he's renting. It's called Tommy and Moon. I rented a house for a year one time on the very edge of a village, and I made friends by dint of passing up and down with a man who lived on a small holding down the road. I was meant to be writing a book, but I wasn't able. And so I walked and waited for the words to come back to me. I'd been paid in advance, and the weight of expectation attached to it had crippled me. Tommy was nearly 80, I'd say, though he never spoke of his age. He was sprightly and lean, and he had most of his hair, and he kept it carefully combed. And he tried never to show me his pain, but I felt it. And he told me things in fits and starts across an ancient table in the kitchen of the cottage his grandfather built. Tommy was an only child, an exotic thing in the time of his youth, a thing to be speculated about, suspicious of. His parents hadn't met before their wedding day. It had all been arranged as a favor. A man met his father the evening before he got married as he wheeled his bicycle up the long hill on his way home from town, a borrowed suit folded on his carrier. You're getting married tomorrow, I hear. I am. Who is she? I don't know. They call her Laurie. They stayed married for 50 years and died not a week apart, but that story did the rounds for generations. They call her Laurie, men would say, stretching out his mother's name, and they'd roar with laughter. Tommy would overhear the telling of it the odd time, and his insides would burn and the backs of his eyes would prickle, and he'd picture his mother and father and their quiet fondness, their easy love for one another. When the Griffins were all gone, his neighbours one time on the far side from me, their house and bit of land fell to a cousin from town who set it and sold the cottage to a queer crowd, Jehovah's Witnesses. They came to his door one time and frightened him with their litany of certitudes, the things that were going to happen to him, and not one thing he could do to save himself unless he was born again. Lord God, he said to them, bad enough to have been born the once, but he hadn't the heart to run them all the same. There was a woman he'd have liked to marry, but he knew no way to cover the ground between them, and nor did she. He read a thing in a book one time about a tribe in Africa who considered themselves to be the rightful owners of all the cattle in the world. He thought often about them, at the mart, in the meadow, foddering the cattle he was guardian, not owner of, in the unknowable minds of those lean, dark, nearly naked herders. He imagined himself going to where they lived, to their plain of sand grass and prickly bushes, circled by jungles and low hills. What would they make of him if he rose, white-faced and Wellington-booted, out from the undergrowth into the light of their campfire? Would they laugh at him or welcome him, thank him for fattening their cattle half a world away? Would they call him brother? Would they kill him? There now would be a death, speared, bleeding out beneath a white-hot sun, turned quickly to carrion, flesh torn from bone by savage jaws and scything beaks. He said, wouldn't that be a glorious exequy? And I was startled to quietness by the word, by his words, by the talk out of him. He kept a hawk once that he'd found by a river on the edge of death. The wrist of its wing was too pronounced, and there were balls of light shot in the mantle of it. He straightened and set the wrist of the hawk's wing with an elastic band and a strip of cardboard, and plucked the shot out with tweezers, and fed it bits of raw chicken, and sat still and silent for days and nights, the hawk perched on his hand. The arm of an old coat he'd fashioned and sewed and used on his hand in place of the leather glove used by professionals. He tamed it by instinct, and by echoes of memories of things told to him in childhood. He knew to be still, to hood the bird between meals, so it would associate the sight of him with food, to gradually show the bird the world, perched all the while on his hand. He flew the hawk free when it had the full of its health back, and his heart thumped until it looped around against the sun and swooped back to him. It lived with him for 7 years, in the back kitchen on a stout perch he'd made from boughs of oak, where it would meet his eyes sometimes and hold them, and tell him, in its dark silence, all the things about the world that could be known by a bird of prey, and tell him that it loved him, pure and perfect. The hawk flew in one summer evening, wet with blood, full of shotgun pellets, and died. It had come back to him to see if he could save it again, and he couldn't. And his breath went from him, and his reason for a time, and the world tilted a bit and never fully righted. Time occupied him. The notion of time being a thing. How was it? All that's real is the present moment. And what's a moment? A thing infinitely divisible downwards. So the smallest part of a moment doesn't exist. So a moment doesn't exist. So time doesn't exist, except as a trick the mind plays on itself to stop all things seeming to happen at once. These are the things an evening can hang on, that can give form to an hour of standing at the haggard gate, leaning, resting a foot on the second bar up, regarding thistles and bees and distant mountains with a level eye, the idea that everything has happened and nothing has happened yet, that existence is a singularity of infinite smallness, that Mammy and Daddy are still alive and were never born, that the hawk is out hunting and might come home yet. The seeming uselessness of existing occurred often to him. The depth of the water at the bend of the river occurred often to him, where it seemed sometimes in flood to flow back on itself, to rage against its own rushing. The coils of rope in the loft of the barn, the discs of poison lead for rats. But yet each morning hope peeled from the eastern sky and rang all day in his ears, or for as much of each day as was needed. So that's that story, Tommy and Moon, again, was based fairly closely on a man I only met a couple of times, but was very fond of and very inspired by, because he was a man who lived alone for most of his life and lost his parents at a very young age, and lived in a small house in a rural area, and was very much in communion with his surroundings. He spent most of his days walking, and he was a naturalist in a very unforced and unorganized way. He observed nature all the time and existed within nature, and created these beautiful pictures of the animals he observed. And he had a kind of there was a kind of element of almost secular saintliness about him, because he was the kind of person animals would approach in the manner of St. Francis of Assisi. He would be still in a field and animals would approach him and surround him, and they would see him, I think, as never being a threat, of being almost kindred to them. And it was a very lovely way to exist. And so he inspired that story, Tommy and Moon. So does anybody have a question?
Yes,
Yes.
I think so. Thank you very much, Donal, for your readings and for your talk. And I would just for the audience to wait to ask some questions, but I would like to start in relation to the way you write your narrative, the flow of speech, and the speed that the narrative has, as if it were a kind of stream of consciousness, but it is not. At the same time, we listen to you, and all the dialogues that occur between the characters that you represent. I do not know if the audience have read something from the printed book, but it is not marked. It is a flow of speech, but nevertheless, the rhythm takes you inside that, what they are saying and what they are thinking. And so I would like to know in which way you find your rhythm, the rhythm of writing, and how much you are inspired and motivated for the very opening of your novels too, that are really very striking.
Actually, when it comes to the technical aspect of arranging text on a page and representing human speech, I was very inspired by the manner in which Frank McCourt wrote dialogue in his memoir, Angela's Ashes. And he actually worked all of the dialogue into sentences. So no actual speech wasn't demarcated in any way. He didn't use commas or capital letters or quotation marks or distinguish speech in any way from the surrounding exposition. And I love that. It literally had a riverine flow, which was apposite for a memoir that was set largely on the banks of a river, the Shannon, going to a Limerick. And it just seemed to work so beautifully. And now I know it upsets an awful lot of readers when quotation marks aren't used, but I think if you do it properly and you do it with care, and if the flow of speech is written in a way that it doesn't interfere with the exposition or doesn't overlap it too much, and if you can make it clear who's speaking at any given time, and if you allow the reader to apply themselves to the task of figuring out who's speaking, I think it works pretty well. Because for me, the level of artifice that quotation marks represent was just too much for me as a writer to use. And now, I mean, as a reader, it's totally fine, obviously, and works most of the time. But it's just a stylistic thing that I struck on. And also, I wanted speech to feel natural. I wanted to feel part of the actions and the kind of the ambient surroundings of a scene. I didn't want the speech to be separate. I didn't want it to stand proud of the story or of the scene. I wanted it to feel like part of it. I wanted to feel the words people use to be almost fully melded with their emotions and with their movements and their actions. And so I think for the most part it works. But of course I can see when people are resistant to the idea of speech being presented in that way, I can see their point, absolutely. But I think for me it's important that that kind of the thought process and the actual spoken word are fairly close to being identical. I think it's important in fiction because you want to strike as quickly and as clearly as possible at the truth of what is being said, even if the actual words represent something different. I think it's important that the way the words are spoken will convey to the reader the truth of what's being felt and what's being communicated.
Right, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Laura, sorry. We do have a question from Giselle Wolkoff, who is following the sessions online. And she asks, hello, Donal. And she asked you, I'm curious about the writer's process of writing or methods, and how does writing account for a writer's multiple identities? That's a very interesting question. And I often ask myself this, to what extent am I on the page myself? And to what extent should I be a very cold and distant and removed and omniscient figure when it comes to a story? And I think it varies, to be honest. I think it varies depending on the kind of story you're telling and your frame of mind. And I remember actually being at the Franco-Irish Literary Festival a few years ago, and a French novelist, I was talking about how when I wrote my second novel, I was very, very immersed in the main character, and I became that character. And literally, I shucked off my own identity for the hours in each day that I was writing the novel. And I became him completely. And I felt the emotions that I ascribed to him. And the book was written in a very close third person. And so I was right in there in the center of the character's soul completely. And so my own personality and my own way of seeing the world was
fully negated for the time of writing. And a French novelist said, that's ridiculous. That couldn't be true. That's no way to write a novel. There's no way you could have written a novel in that manner. So, and I mean, that's fair enough, because in her experience, that wasn't something she could do. And also, I think that in order to write, in order to write fiction successfully, or in order to write fiction that strikes at some truth about the human condition, or that illuminates some aspect of this kind of this inchoate thing that life, basically, that illuminates some aspect of what it is to be human. And I think it's important to be as open as possible to everything, and never to shut anything down. And I think that requires us to quieten our own instincts and impulses, and to almost at times subvert our own impulses and our own kind of latent beliefs, things that we are naturally inclined to believe or to think, and to be open to the truth of other people's way of seeing the world, and the truth for them, because there is an infinity of ways of putting a grammar on existence. There's an infinity of ways of feeling about the world. And at the same time, it's actually impossible for any one person to know exactly how it feels to be another person. And so I think that writing fiction requires us to be extremely open, and to extend our empathy perhaps beyond its natural limits, to cross over the border of empathy into this place where you're almost, in a way, inhabiting the body of somebody else and the mind and existence of somebody else. But it's a big area, it really is, and it's an area that can be studied and talked about, and you still might never arrive at a satisfying conclusion about it.
Thank you. Any more questions here from the floor? About adaptation, Donal, do you participate directly in the adaptations for the screen or for the stage? Or just you give the authorization for them to do whatever they want?
Yeah, I like to do as little extra work as possible when it comes to writing, because, and that sounds lazy, but when it comes to a novel or a short story, once I've written it and it's been edited and published, I feel as though that's all I can do. And if somebody wants to adapt something for the stage or screen, that's completely up to them. And it's kind of none of my business. And so I'm hands off completely, but I do like to just have a little bit of editorial oversight when it comes to the particular vernacular of my characters, because it's very easy to allow a rural vernacular to slip into stage Irishness. And I absolutely, I hate when that happens. And there's a very, very fine line. I mean, there are loads of people who will read my books and say, that's stage Irish. But for me, it's a representation of a very true demotic that's used by the people I love, and used by myself and my family and the people from the place where I'm from. And that's it, really. I'm pretty particular about that. But that might just mean changing 2 or 3 phrases in a manuscript, or a screenplay, or a draft of a play for stage. So I'm really happy to let playwrights or screenwriters, or do their own thing, work their own magic.
Great. Yes, there is a question here from Gabriela. No, come here, Gabriela.
Hi, Donal. Thank you very much for your presentation. Well, there was a part of my question that it's already answered, which is the process of writing. And but about how do you build up the characters in terms of physical appearances, personalities, issues, and how they try to interconnect them. I heard that you do it with personal experience, that people, but how about other characters? Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you. And I remember reading Stephen King's great book on writing called On Writing, and he very wisely advised writers to describe characters physically in very curt and almost perfunctory terms, to allow the reader one or two or maybe three characteristics, and to allow the reader to build the character physically for themselves. And so he reckoned that a kind of a basic shape and height and hair color and maybe eye color was enough to allow a reader to give birth almost to this new human themselves in their imagination. And I think that's a good idea, because it allows the reader to become very invested in the character if they've almost created them. And it's one of the great joys of reading. I love films, but when you read a story, you create the setting and the set and the colors and the hues and the shapes and the sounds for yourself. And it's a very beautiful thing. So we parlay language back into images in our imagination, and it's a great thing to do. And it's almost magical. And I like characters' personalities to arise naturally from their actions and their speech, so that I never have to use direct descriptors. I never have to say somebody is sneaky or generous or kind or unkind. These things should always be obvious, I think, from what they do. And I worked really hard over the years at compressing this, at making these things very apparent in very compressed ways. So trying to fit in an almost complete depiction of a person's characteristics in a few clauses. But also I find it very useful to cleave to the idea that we all contain multitudes. To paraphrase Walt Whitman, we are all contradictory. We're all capable of all kinds of behaviors and all kinds of thoughts, and we can all be a different person day by day. And so that complexity, I think, is very important, that nuance in the human condition, that nobody is, that nothing is black and white, that nobody is fully good or fully bad, or very few people anyway, that we're all capable of all kinds of things. And it's important, I think, for fiction writers to bear that in mind.
Well, I think we are reaching by the end. There is another question then. So Margaret, please, from... Yes, I think. And so you can look at the camera. Okay. So sorry, Donald, that you're not seeing the people here.
No, it's fine. I can see you.
Okay, they are changing the camera just for you to see the audience and the question from Margaret.
Okay. Hi, Donal. Thanks very much. That was really wonderful. Margaret Breheny, and I'm from Galway.
Hi, Margaret. How are you doing?
How are you? I'm wondering, it's wonderful to, hear about those characters that are close to you in your writing. And it comes from a small place, I mean, location-wise. And do you ever find that when you're writing about these characters and it's coming from a place of people that does that hold you back? You're in one way you're saying, let go and write these characters who are people that you know and other people probably know and may recognize. How do you manage that in writing the character?
That's a great question, Margaret. And I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but by narrowing the physical geographic scope of my fiction, I felt very unshackled from the burden of trying to place stories. And the thing is, even though I confine, for the most part, my stories and novels to the same fictional village, it's kind of a composite of Nina and Newtown and Ballina and Newport and the places where I grew up, all human life is there. And the way that humans interact and the things that occupy us as humans, I think, are very universal. And I think that, that the way people act in my village in Tipperary will resonate with the way people act in a city in America or, a township in Africa or anywhere in the world. I think that, we have kind of the same concerns, I think. And also, it was a very useful expedient for me. Those years I spent burning and tearing things up and destroying everything I wrote ended when I struck on the very simple expedient of using the demotic of my own people as my raw material and using the landscape of my native place as my setting. It allowed me to not worry about that thing verisimilitude. But having said that, I mean, I've written stories set in Africa and partly in Syria, and I've described characters that would be pretty alien to the place where I generally reside as a storyteller. But again, you know, I didn't do so until I had fairly detailed and extensive experience of those kinds of experiences. And so, you know, so by proxy, I was allowed to feel kind of a breath of what it might feel like to be in the position of, for example, Farouk Galahad from Low and Quiet Sea, only because I was privileged enough to be allowed to work with people like Farouk for a long time. And so bit by bit, I aggregated a kind of set of stories that amounted to a breath just of the feeling that Farouk might have had in his heart and soul when the things that happened to him. But I think that's the way, you know, that's the way probably most writers of fiction operate. You know, you have to look about the world and soak things in and try your best to put some kind of grammar on those things, and hope that you're striking somewhere close to the direction of truth.
Thank you.
You never know, of course.
Thank you, Donal. I think we have reached the end of our session, and I would like to thank you a lot for sharing your thoughts and sharing your work. I'm sure that all of us have been very much inspired by it and will read your work, follow you. And there are many translators here also. I know that your work has been translated into 20 languages. But I'm sure that in Mexico, here in Peru, in all the countries in Spain, and here in Argentina and Brazil, would like to work and to translate also.
That's lovely. Actually, can I just say that I salute you, translators. I think you're the most amazing people, and I think that it's one of the most generous and noble art forms, translation, because you are absolutely, you're guardians of narrative and guardians of empathy, and you carry stories across borders and into readers' minds and hearts. And it's just, and I think you're not appreciated enough at all. And I know the unbelievable work you do and how hard your job is. So I salute you and lovely to see you. And thank you all so much for listening to me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks a lot. And please join me. Thank you, Donal. We'll keep in contact for sure.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. So now I think you'll have some coffee break, and then we will continue with the following activity with Cristina Elgue Martin. Thank you.